moment her tiny voice echoed through the crystalline hall, the air changed. Delegates from 9 galaxies stared in stunned silence as the alien princess pointed not to a general, not to a knight, but to a man who scrubbed the floor with worn gloves and tired hands. Her mother, the Queen of Virelia, froze mid-sentence, her crown's glow flickering as the child defied protocol in the most public way imaginable. Because what the princess wanted wasn't protection from danger, she wanted a father. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, planet, moon, or coffee shop on Earth. And if stories like this make your chest ache in all the best ways, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's chapter might break you in ways you didn't expect. The scent of metal polish lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of the royal throne chamber's electro-crystals. Jonah knelt on one knee, his hands raw from the cleaner he could no longer afford gloves for, scrubbing at a smudge no one else could see. The chamber was silent but for the distant murmur of delegates in the upper tiers. Light filtered down from the ceiling panels like frozen starlight, catching in the grooves of the obsidian floor he so carefully tended. No one greeted him. No one asked his name. To the galaxy, he was the same as the mop necessary, invisible. His uniform was faded gray, sleeveless now from years of wear, stitched over with patches that didn't match. Once, he'd been a mechanic. Before that, a father. Now, just a man with a bucket and no past. But he cleaned the Queen's hall like it was sacred. Maybe, to him, it was. Behind him, soft footsteps padded against the marble. Not the heavy click of guards, not the pompous stomp of nobles. These were light, almost unsure. Jonah paused, not because he was startled, he'd grown used to being ignored, but because something felt watched. When he turned, she was there, small, barely taller than his mop. Silver-blue skin like morning frost, hair cascading down her back in a waterfall of light. Her eyes were enormous, violet and starry, rimmed with a shimmer that seemed too old for her face. She stood just behind the reflection line of the royal seal etched into the floor, hands folded behind her back like she'd been taught to behave, but her gaze said she wasn't planning on obeying today. Jonah blinked once. He knew who she was, everyone did. Princess Kalia. He'd seen her once from a balcony above when she was crowned as heir, her crown too big for her head, her voice too small to hear. She was the galaxy's miracle, the child born of 10 bloodlines, the unity symbol of 9 systems. And now she was staring at him like he'd stolen her favorite toy. He slowly lowered his mop. "You're doing it wrong," she said finally. Jonah tilted his head. "Doing what?" "The swirls," she said, stepping closer. Her voice wasn't royal. It wasn't trained. It was small and sharp and full of certainty. "They're supposed to go clockwise near the seal. That's how my father used to do it." Jonah froze. Her father had died before she turned 2. That was public knowledge. A tragic assassination in the outer colonies. She couldn't possibly remember him. "Clockwise," she repeated softly. And suddenly the strange shimmer in her eyes dimmed, just a little. She crouched beside him, one hand hovering over the floor, her fingertips twitching in the air as if tracing ghosts. Jonah didn't speak. He simply nodded and adjusted the mop. Kalia watched him for a moment, then sat cross-legged beside the bucket. Her crown flickered faintly at her temple, reacting to her mood. She looked at him, really looked, and asked a question that changed everything. "Why are you sad when you clean?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. His throat clenched too hard. Instead, he dipped the mop again and showed her the clockwise pattern, just like her father used to. And from the shadows of the chamber's far wall, the Queen, silent and watching, forgot how to breathe. The next morning, Jonah returned to the throne chamber before sunrise, as he always did. The palace was quieter at this hour, no humming nobles, no stomping boots, just the endless hum of the circuits in the walls and the soft buzz of early light filtering through the latticework windows. He liked it this way. Clean floors before the galaxy marched across them. Silence before judgment. He hadn't expected the girl to return, but she did. Princess Kalia was already there when he entered, sitting exactly where he'd left her the day before, her tiny back straight, hands in her lap. Her hair had been braided down her back, silver woven with threads of pale blue that glowed faintly under the ambient light. She didn't look at him at first. She was watching her reflection ripple in the obsidian floor. A child-shaped question mark. Jonah hesitated at the threshold. He wasn't sure what was more dangerous, being seen near the princess twice, or being the only one who seemed to understand why she came. He slowly rolled the mop bucket forward. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "I was wondering if you'd come back," she said without looking up. He knelt and began wringing the mop. "This is my shift." She turned toward him then, her voice softer. "Not you, me." Jonah looked up and met her gaze. The princess's eyes weren't just violet. They were layered depths within depths, like someone had hidden starlight behind frost. It was the kind of look people only got when they'd seen things they weren't supposed to, or remembered things they shouldn't. "Did I clean it wrong again?" he asked, trying to soften the moment. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You cleaned it the way my father did." Jonah's breath caught. He hadn't meant for the joke to land like that. "You remember that?" She shrugged. "Not really, just when you did it, it felt right. Like something in my chest stopped aching for a second." Jonah didn't answer. He just dipped the mop into the bucket again, trying to keep his hands steady. He hadn't spoken to a child in years, not since. "Do you miss her?" Kalia asked. He stopped moving. "My father," she clarified. "Do you miss your daughter?" His fingers gripped the mop handle too tightly. Slowly, he stood. "I'm not supposed to talk about those things." "Why?" He looked at her again. "Because people like me aren't supposed to be seen." She stood too then, walking over until she was right beside him. The top of her head barely reached his chest. She pointed at the floor, at the clean circle of swirling shine they'd made the day before. "But I saw you," she whispered. Jonah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I dream about him," she said. "Sometimes I think I hear his voice, but it's not really him. It's just a feeling." Jonah crouched down, slow and careful. "That feeling? It's memory. It stays in the bones longer than the mind." Kalia looked down at her small hands. "Then why does everyone pretend he never existed?" "Because remembering hurts," he said. She reached out and touched his shoulder, a small hand on worn fabric. "I think we should remember anyway." And for the first time since he lost his daughter, Jonah let his eyes close and nodded. Because deep in the heart of a galaxy built on forgetting, a child had chosen to remember. Queen Adrian stood behind the privacy glass, hands folded tight at her waist, unmoving. The observation room was silent, save for the occasional flicker of crystal monitors. She had returned to the capital only 3 hours ago, earlier than expected, earlier than announced. No one had known she was coming. Not the ministers, not the court, not even her daughter. But it was her daughter who held her gaze now. Through the transparent wall, she watched the impossible scene unfold again. Princess Kalia, the crown's sole heir, sitting cross-legged beside a human maintenance worker. No guards, no attendants. No warning. And not just sitting, talking, engaging, trusting, laughing. Adrian's face remained unreadable, a discipline honed from decades on the throne, but her knuckles had turned white. The human was older than she'd expected, late 30s, perhaps early 40s, weathered hands, tired posture. He moved with the economy of someone used to being ignored. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't look like anything at all. But Kalia leaned toward him, like he held all the secrets of the stars, and that terrified Adrian more than any weapon ever had. The Queen turned to the monitor technician. "Who is he?" The attendant hesitated. "His name is Jonah Meris, Majesty. Maintenance crew Tier 3, assigned to floor rotation and ceremonial purification. No criminal record, no political affiliations, no surviving family." "No family?" The attendant's eyes flicked nervously across his tablet. "Records indicate a daughter, deceased, war casualty during the border collapse, human refugee sector." Adrian looked back at the glass. Kalia had drawn something on the floor with her fingertip, a spiral, imperfect and wide. Jonah traced it behind her with his mop, not correcting her, only following. Their voices weren't audible through the glass, but Adrian didn't need to hear them. The language between them was plain. Shared silence, mutual ache. This couldn't happen. It simply wasn't allowed. The princess wasn't to fraternize with staff, let alone bond with them. It was more than protocol. It was safety, tradition, image. And yet, there was no mistaking the softness in Kalia's eyes, the way her shoulders dropped around him, the way she smiled with her whole face. She hadn't smiled like that in years. Adrian closed her eyes. Memories came without permission. The day her consort was killed, the way the sky cracked open above their escape vessel, Kalia's tiny fists clutched around her father's last medallion. She'd been too young to understand, too fragile to be burdened with remembrance. Yet here she was, remembering without being taught. "Dismiss the chamber staff rotation," Adrian said at last. The attendant blinked. "Majesty, don't alarm them. I'll observe him myself." As the technician nodded and departed, the queen stepped closer to the glass. Kalia was now drawing with water. Circles again. Spirals. Symbols that looked almost familiar, though Adrian couldn't say why. Jonah had said something. Kalia laughed. The sound struck something in Adrian's chest she hadn't felt since her consort's death. Grief, yes, but also something else. A crack. A dangerous, impossible crack in the perfect wall she'd built between herself and the past. Because her daughter had found someone who made her feel safe, and that someone wasn't royal, wasn't trained, wasn't authorized. He was just kind. And Queen Adrian, for the first time in a long while, didn't know what to do. The hall of petitions was brimming with the usual pomp-jeweled envoys from the Archthel system seated in crescent tiers, golden-boned Varelian guards posted at every exit, and a trio of elder magistrates preparing to deliver a decree no one would remember a week from now. The queen sat at the highest dais, expression cool and distant, her silver crown refracting light like 1,000 tiny comets. Everything was proceeding exactly as it always did, until Kalia walked in, unannounced. The doors didn't swing with royal ceremony, they simply parted. The child strode forward in her ceremonial braid and twilight-colored robes, eyes sharp as stormlight, steps unshaken despite the gasps that followed her. She was not scheduled to attend. She was certainly not permitted to interrupt, but she did. Adrian straightened. The court turned. The murmurs became a hush. The princess marched straight to the center of the floor and turned slowly first to the queen, then to the assembled ministers, then to the gathered cameras hovering silently overhead. She stood in the direct center of the law ring where judgments were passed, and then she raised her arm, not to address the queen, not to point to a knight, not to the captain of the guard. She pointed at him, Jonah Merris, kneeling on the far end of the chamber floor, polishing the obsidian edge of the royal insignia. His bucket was half full, his sleeves were damp, his back was still turned. It took a moment before anyone even registered what she was doing. It was so absurd, so utterly outside the bounds of expectation, that no one moved. Then Kalia spoke, loud enough for the throne to hear. "I don't want a royal guardian," she said, voice unwavering. "I want him." The silence collapsed into chaos. Voices rose like birds startled into flight, indignant, horrified, dismissive. Some shouted to silence her, others to question her meaning. The court chamber turned electric. The queen's advisors leaned in toward her with wild urgency, their mouths moving in panicked bursts. The queen herself said nothing. Jonah looked up. His eyes met the child's, and in that moment, something ancient passed between them. It wasn't recognition, it was gravity. Like two stars remembering they had once orbited the same Sunday, the chief of protocol stepped forward. "Your Highness, forgive the interruption, but the selection of a royal guardian is dictated by council law. It cannot be." "I am the crown's heir," Kalia said, cutting him off without raising her voice. "And the right of choice is still binding." Another wave of whispers crashed across the chamber like a tide. The right of choice was an ancient, nearly forgotten clause, so old and obscure it had never been invoked in living memory. But it was real, and the child had just used it. Queen Adrian finally rose to her feet, the court silenced again, as if drawn to her gravity. She looked down at her daughter, eyes unreadable. Then slowly, she turned her gaze to Jonah, still on his knees, still silent, still holding the mop like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. He met the queen's eyes for the first time. He did not bow, he did not speak, he simply waited. And in that stillness, something shifted in the bones of the galaxy. Because the princess had chosen not power, not legacy, not protocol, she had chosen him. The fallout began the moment the princess pointed. By dusk, the Queen's High Council had convened an emergency session inside the Crescent Chamber. Advisors from 6 allied systems arrived early, their robes still bearing the creases of hurried transit. Screens glowed with legal texts no one had read in centuries. The words, right of choice, flickered across every document like a warning. "He's a human," said Magistrate Ilaran flatly. "No military standing, no blood tie, no legacy." Minister Valcor slammed his fist on the table. "He's a janitor. He was chosen," said the Queen calmly. Valcor's gills fluttered. "Majesty, the right of choice was written in the age of blade oaths and fire pledges, before neural vetting, before the Guardian selection protocols. It was symbolic, not binding." Adrian met his eyes. "It was never removed." Silence thickened the air. "He doesn't even have a title," Ilaran pressed. "No house, no honor code, no interstellar record. We have 5 qualified guardians from the Royal Corps alone, war-trained, loyal, prepared." The Queen's voice was cool. "And not one of them was chosen by my daughter." They fell quiet again. Far below, in a polished waiting room tucked behind the ceremonial wing, Jonah sat on a simple bench, palms open on his knees. No cuffs, no chains, but no questions either. No one had spoken to him since the chamber guards walked him out under 1,000 watching eyes. He stared at his hands. The fingertips were still red, cleaner seeping into the cracked skin. He should have been frightened. He wasn't. Just tired. A soft tap echoed from the glass wall in front of him. Kalia stood there, barefoot, hair loose around her shoulders, tiny palms pressed to the pane. She looked small in the silence, but not afraid. He stood slowly. "I told them I want you," she said. Jonah's throat tightened. "They're not going to listen. They never do," she said softly, "unless I cry." He looked down. "Don't cry for me." "I'm not," she whispered. "I cry for me. Because when you look at me, I feel like I'm allowed to be small." He blinked. "Everyone wants me to be strong," she continued. "You're the first one who didn't." He stepped forward, hand lifted, not touching the glass, but close. Her hand met his through it. Upstairs, Adrian watched from a discreet balcony, her advisors arguing below. She could barely hear them now. Her gaze stayed locked on her daughter, on the child she'd tried to protect through protocol, security, power. But the girl didn't want power. She wanted safety, and she had found it in the most forbidden place of all, a man with no title, no armor, and nothing left to prove. The Queen turned, interrupting the debate with one word. "Enough." The council froze. Adrian's voice was low, but it carried. "She chose him. The law allows it." And though her voice didn't waver, something else cracked, because deep down, she feared her daughter wasn't wrong. The Queen's private quarters were silent, save for the soft hiss of shifting skylight panels. Outside, the towers of Virelia glimmered like glass bones in the dusk, a city built on ceremony, rule, and remembrance. Queen Adrian stood with her back to the doorway, arms folded, watching the skyline pulse. She didn't turn when the guard announced Jonah Maris's arrival. She only spoke once the door sealed behind him. "You were once a mechanic," she said, her voice calm. "You kept ships alive." Jonah stood still. "I was good with engines. You're good with children too." That made him flinch. He wasn't sure if it was the word good or children that unsettled him more. Adrian turned slowly. No crown tonight, just a simple wrap of silver thread at her brow. She looked smaller without the ceremonial light. Less queen, more mother, more human. "You lost a daughter," she said, not asking. He nodded once. "Arya, I'm sorry." Jonah didn't speak. "Do you know why I brought you here instead of letting the council tear you apart? I assume it wasn't mercy." "It wasn't." Her tone remained even. "It was because I needed to see for myself if Kalia was imagining something or remembering something." His eyes rose. "She remembers flashes, shapes, emotions. My physicians say they're dreams, echoes, but they always begin with one feeling: safety." Jonah's mouth was dry. "She shouldn't feel that from me." But she does. They stood there in the quiet that follows too much truth. She said something strange, Adrian added, that when you're near her, she doesn't feel like a problem. Jonah looked away. Neither did Arya. The Queen studied him. Do you know what protocol demands I do? Remove me, he said flatly. Charge me with impropriety. Assign a qualified guardian in my place. Wipe my name from the archives. Adrian stepped closer. Do you know what my pulse demands? He frowned. Pulse? She tapped her fingers lightly to her chest. The place where logic falters and memory lives. The part that's still a mother. Jonah swallowed hard. I remember watching Kalia cry when she was 3, she said. No one could soothe her. Not the nurses, not the ministers. But a janitor walked past and hummed an old earth lullaby, no reason, just muscle memory. And she stopped crying. Jonah blinked. I don't remember that. She did. Silence stretched. I don't want to be her guardian, he said finally. Not if it's for show. Not if it's politics. It's not. He looked at her. Then what is it? Adrian's voice dropped. It's a risk. One I've never taken in public. One my crown has never allowed. Jonah didn't move. Do you still remember how to keep something running? She asked. Even when everyone says it's beyond repair. His voice was quiet. That's all I've ever done. She nodded once. Then I won't stop her. And for the first time in years, Jonah felt the floor steady beneath his feet. The royal physician had once told Adrian that memories in children were like wet paint, vivid at first, but easily smudged, easily overwritten. And yet, as Queen Adrian sat beside her daughter that night, listening to her speak in low, dream-struck tones, she realized some memories never truly faded. They just went underground. Kalia's room glowed with soft aurora light, the ceiling painted to resemble the night skies of a dozen planets. She lay curled in her sleep nest, her crown removed, her silken robes wrinkled from restlessness. Jonah sat on the floor beside her, legs crossed, back straight but tired. Adrian stood just inside the doorway, arms folded, watching both of them in silence. It wasn't a dream, Kalia said softly, staring at nothing. It was a hallway, very bright. I was running, and there was a smell, like oil and heat. Someone picked me up. Do you remember who? Adrian asked, voice gentle. Kalia frowned. He said my name wrong, but it didn't sound wrong. It sounded warm. Jonah's breath caught, but he said nothing. There was a bang, Kalia whispered. Loud, everything shook. He shielded me with his arms. I remember the patch on his sleeve. It had a comet on it, and it smelled like old soap. Ezra Great, Jonah's mouth opened. He closed it again. I used to wear that patch, he said quietly. It was from a mining crew that worked the outer moons. We were near the refugee lines when the fighting broke out. He stopped, eyes darkening. I was trying to get my daughter out. Adrian stepped forward. You were there? During the border collapse. He nodded slowly. She and I got separated in the chaos. I found a vessel, overloaded, no navigation. I took whoever I could. Kids, strays. There was one girl who kept calling for her mother. I remember holding her until she passed out. Kalia looked at him. You sang something, she said. It had no words, just a hum. Jonah's voice dropped. Arya used to fall asleep to it. Adrian's hands tightened at her sides. After that day, Kalia wouldn't let anyone touch her but me, she said. She didn't speak for weeks. We thought it was trauma. It was, Jonah said. But not from fear, from memory. She knew something had been lost. The room fell silent. Kalia sat up slowly and reached out. Her small fingers wrapped around Jonah's hand. I never forgot you, she whispered. Jonah's voice cracked. I never thought I'd be remembered. Adrian watched the scene unfold, two souls separated by time, drawn back together by threads neither of them could see, only feel. The past hadn't just resurfaced. It had returned in the form of a child remembering the only arms that had ever made her feel safe. And the Queen, for the first time, wondered if fate wasn't something written by crowns, but by kindnesses too small to notice until they came back home. The tribunal chamber was transformed. What had once been a stage for law and spectacle now bristled with tension. Delegates packed the upper tiers, their jeweled robes casting fractal light across the black stone floor. Cameras hovered silently above, transmitting every angle back to the 9 systems. This was not a trial in the old sense. No crime had been committed. But in the wake of Kalia's demand, one question required answering. Could a janitor be worthy of the crown's trust? Jonah stood in the center of the chamber. No armor, no advocate, just his worn gray jumpsuit and the mop handle the guards hadn't thought to confiscate. His face was unreadable, but his hands were steady. On the dais, Queen Adrian rose. "To honor the ancient right of choice," she declared. "We offer a path not of blood or battle, but of understanding, the trial of worth." A murmur rippled through the court. From the shadows, a Threxian scribe stepped forward, carrying a silver orb the size of a heart. She placed it at Jonah's feet. It pulsed once, then unfolded into light, a shifting lattice of language, color, and logic. This was no physical challenge. It was mental, emotional. A relic test used in the old days to separate the sincere from the self-serving. It measured not cleverness, but intention. "Step forward," Adrian said. Jonah inhaled slowly, then moved to the edge of the lattice. The patterns danced, symbols layered with symbols, scripts bleeding into one another, colors vibrating with unseen rhythm. He recognized none of it. And yet, something stirred in him. A memory. On the outer moons, after Arya's death, he used to draw spirals in dust, not to remember, but to cope. And now here they were again, spirals hidden in the light, waiting to be traced. He lifted the mop. A gasp, but he didn't swing. He rotated the handle, using its base like a stylus, moving gently across the projected lines. The lattice responded, shifting colors, collapsing shapes into harmonies. He moved slowly, like he did when cleaning stubborn grime, carefully, patiently, until the mess became manageable. The lattice flickered, shapes aligned. The orb pulsed blue. Whispers swept the chamber. "Is he solving it?" someone asked. A few scoffed. Others leaned forward. Jonah didn't look up. He moved with quiet purpose, coaxing meaning from the chaos. It wasn't about knowing the answer. It was about caring enough to try. That was the trick of the test. The court expected a show of brilliance. But the orb responded to humility, to persistence, to sincerity. After 12 minutes, the lattice stilled. A single line of light traced the floor between Jonah and the queen. Accepted. No fanfare, no fireworks, just acknowledgement. But Kalia, watching from her seat beside the throne, smiled so wide her crown slipped sideways. Jonah lowered the mop, his shoulders loosening. The trial was done, and in the hush that followed, the court wasn't thinking about protocol anymore. They were wondering if worth had always looked like this. Quiet, steady, human. The court demanded a second test. Some said the first was too abstract. Others called it a fluke, a trick of pattern matching, a janitor's luck. The queen, stone-faced, allowed the motion. Not because she doubted Jonah, but because the challenge needed to die on the same stage where it was born. So they summoned the Guardian's measure, a reflex and defense simulation rooted in instinct. In centuries past, warriors trained their whole lives for it. The lattice dome adjusted its calibration. Dozens of glowing spears of light emerged, floating in jagged orbits around Jonah. The goal was simple: protect the simulated charge at the center, a flickering projection shaped like a small child from every incoming strike. Jonah had no training, no shield, no weapon. The moment the trial began, light spears darted toward the center. Jonah moved fast, but not fast enough. He blocked one with his arm, winced as the simulation grazed him, but another clipped the child image's shoulder. It blinked red. Failure. Gasps echoed through the hall. He gritted his teeth, tried again. He adjusted, used the mop handle like a baton, spinning it to deflect the next 2 beams. His timing improved, but the simulation was relentless. It escalated quickly, too quickly, designed for trained reflexes, for augmentations he didn't have. More hits, more red flashes. The simulation dimmed. The judges began whispering. Jonah stood at the center, panting, bruised from the feedback pulses. He hadn't lasted long enough. He had failed. From the high tier, Minister Valcor stood. "Let this charade end. We've humored sentimentality long enough." Jonah said nothing. He didn't try to defend himself. Didn't argue. He simply lowered the mop, shoulders heavy, gaze low. But before Valcor could speak again, a new sound cut the chamber. A sob. The room froze. Kalia had risen from her seat, her small fists clenched at her sides, her face twisted in a raw, soundless cry. She stepped forward, her crown tilting. Tears rolled down her cheeks, real ones, unhidden, unfiltered. The room didn't know how to handle it. She had never cried in public, never once. "I don't care if he's fast," she said, voice cracking. "I don't care if he can fight. I only care that he looked at me like I mattered when no one else did." Silence. "He failed your test," she said, pointing to the simulation. "But he passed mine." Then she did something no princess had done in a century. She walked down from the throne, across the trial floor, and took Jonah's hand. He knelt instinctively, but she pulled him back up, her small fingers wrapped around his as if the world were trying to take him, and she had decided not to let go. The chamber watched in stillness, because there is no protocol for a child choosing love over law. And in that moment, her tears spoke more truth than any tribunal ever had. The throne room had never been this quiet. Kalia stood beside Jonah, hands still wrapped around his, her cheeks wet, her crown askew. Jonah didn't move, not out of fear, but reverence. He could feel the room holding its breath, as though waiting for the queen to banish him with a glance. But Queen Adrian did not speak, not at first. Instead, she descended the stairs of the throne slowly, each step a ripple of silken robes and a legacy that stretched longer than a lifetime. When she reached the floor, she looked not at her daughter, but at Jonah. "You are not a soldier," she said. "No," he replied. "You are not trained. You are not swift. You are not, by any measure of our law, a guardian. And I know." She nodded once, slowly, then turned to Kalia. "Tell me, daughter, do you understand what you've asked?" Kalia looked up, unshaken. "I asked for someone who wouldn't leave when I was afraid, someone who didn't need a crown to stand beside me." "You asked for something dangerous," the queen murmured. "I asked for something real." A shiver moved through the crowd. Queen Adrian lifted her gaze, voice rising for all to hear. "Then let it be decided not by court or custom, but by the right of flame." An audible gasp. A senator dropped his tablet. Even Jonah felt his breath freeze. He had heard of it only in passing. The right of flame was old, ancient, a tradition from before spacefaring empires, when bonds were forged in fire, not ceremony. It was rarely used, too risky, too symbolic. Adrian turned to the Master of Rites. "Prepare the chamber. No one has invoked it in 3 generations, Your Majesty. Then it's long overdue." Within the hour, the lower sanctum was opened, a place carved into the heart of the palace, where molten light flowed through glass trenches and the air shimmered with old power. At its center, a ring of fire suspended by anti-gravity coils, burning without smoke, alive with color, not of this world. The queen stood at the platform's edge. "The right of flame," she said to the watching court, "is not a test of strength. It is not a show of force. It is a surrender. A declaration of devotion so true, the flame either accepts or consumes." She turned to Jonah. "Step in only if you mean it." He looked to Kalia, who nodded once. Then, without a word, Jonah walked barefoot into the ring of fire. The chamber pulsed. The flames licked around him but did not burn. Instead, they bent, coiled, shimmered, and then, slowly, shifted from gold to soft violet, the color of a child's trust. The fire had accepted him. The court stood stunned. Jonah emerged from the ring, clothes untouched, face illuminated by the glow of something ancient and true. Queen Adrian stepped forward and placed a hand to his shoulder, not as ruler to subject, but as one parent acknowledging another. "The crown," she said, "recognizes the guardian of its heir." The flames still danced behind Jonah as the final words of the rite faded into silence. He stood at the center of the chamber, not in triumph, but in stillness. His hands were loose at his sides, his chest rising slowly with the weight of what had just occurred. Violet light flickered across his face, a warmth not of heat, but of recognition. No one clapped, no one cheered. This was not the moment for celebration. It was the moment history shifted without spectacle, when an empire built on lineage and precision acknowledged something gentler: choice. Queen Adrian stepped back, allowing Jonah to return beside Kalia. She hadn't moved since he entered the flame. Her small hands were clasped at her chest, as if praying, though no gods remained in the Varelian pantheon. Only ancestors and memory. Her eyes never left his. "You're glowing," she whispered as he approached. He looked down. Faint rings of light shimmered along his skin, residue from the flame's response. Not burns, not scars, marks of acceptance. The fire had known his intentions and chosen not to consume. "Maybe it's just sweat," he said quietly. She smiled. Above them, members of the court remained stunned. Delegates whispered behind hands, unsure what protocol demanded now. A janitor had walked through fire, and the fire, older than law, had called him worthy. "This changes everything," murmured Ilaran from the first bench. "No," Adrian replied evenly. "It reveals what was already true." The Master of Rites stepped forward, holding a simple circlet. Not a crown, not armor, just a polished band of tempered steel, engraved with the flame's spiral pattern. "For the Guardian," he said. Jonah didn't reach for it. Kalia did. She took the circlet with both hands, careful not to drop it, and then stood on tiptoe to place it gently on Jonah's head. "I think this means you're mine now," she said. He crouched slightly so she could reach. "I think I've always been." A ripple passed through the chamber, subtle but real. Something in the way she said it, in the way he knelt to receive it. Not like a knight, not like a subject, like a man lowering himself to speak with a child at eye level. A father might do that. The queen watched, her expression unreadable, but her hand, faintly trembling, gripped her own wrist as if steadying herself. "Let the record reflect," she said aloud, "that Jonah Merris has been named guardian to the crown heir under the right of flame, witnessed by the tribunal and accepted by the fire." The chamber recorded it, not just in archives, but in the eyes of those present. Across systems, across broadcasts, millions would watch and wonder, because something new had been born, not through blood or conquest, but through the quiet power of being chosen. And in that chamber of fire and stone, the first royal guardian, not bred for battle but born from memory, stood taller than any soldier. No horns sounded, no banners dropped, no triumphal march echoed across the towers of Varelia. And yet, something had changed. Jonah walked beside Kalia through the grand gallery, no longer in his janitor's uniform, but in ceremonial grey, simple, unadorned, marked only by the violet flame seal etched over his heart. The circlet she'd placed on his head earlier now rested in his hands. He didn't wear it. He carried it, carefully, as if the weight was still sinking in. Kalia didn't skip or twirl as she usually did when the halls were quiet. Today she simply walked beside him. Every few steps, she looked up at his face to make sure he was still there, as if afraid he might vanish if she blinked too long. "You don't have to bow to them," she said suddenly, nodding toward two passing nobles who lowered their eyes at Jonah. "I wasn't going to," he replied. She grinned. From the upper balconies, delegates and senators watched, some in silence, others with careful expressions that tried to mask what they felt. Admiration, confusion, maybe even a touch of envy. It wasn't the trial that had changed the court. It was the aftermath. Jonah didn't walk like someone elevated. He walked like someone restored. At the top of the gallery, Queen Adrian stood waiting. The sunlight pouring in through the stained glass behind her cast her shadow across the polished floor, but even it seemed softer today. She studied her daughter first, calm, grounded. Then Jonah, who stopped 3 paces short of her, unsure if he should speak first. She broke the silence. "Have you eaten?" Jonah blinked. No." Adrian turned to an attendant. "Ensure the guardian eats, and that he rests. No duties for 48 hours. The attendant bowed and left. Kalia glanced up at Jonah. "Told you she's nice when she's tired." Adrian arched an eyebrow. but said nothing. "You've made quite a mess of the court," she told Jonah. "You realize that, yes?" "I was just cleaning the floor," he said. A small smile tugged at the Queen's mouth before she turned serious again. "There will be scrutiny. Tests. Not all of them ceremonial. Some will question your authority. Others will try to prove your presence makes her weaker." "I'm not here to make her anything," he replied. "I'm here because she asked me not to leave." Adrian held his gaze. "Then do not." A quiet pause passed between them. And then, for the first time, the Queen bowed her head, not deeply, not for show, but with meaning. "Guardian Meris," she said. "Welcome." From that moment, no one argued. Not aloud, not where the girl could hear. Because the child had named her protector, the flame had agreed, and the Queen had bent not to a sword or counsel, but to love. A new kind of guardian walked beside the heir now, one not forged by training, but by tenderness. And the palace would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, the palace adjusted not with ceremony, but with quiet ripples. Doors that had never opened to Jonah before now slid aside without question. Guards who once ignored his presence now offered short nods. Ministers, though stiff at first, slowly shifted from disdain to curiosity. And Kalia? She flourished, no longer shadowed by formality or left in the care of strangers who spoke to her crown instead of her face. She moved through the halls like a girl finally allowed to breathe. She studied harder, slept deeper, smiled more. Not because of privilege, but because Jonah was always there, just far enough to respect her space, close enough to catch her when she faltered. They walked the gardens together at dusk, played memory games with corridor patterns. She taught him the names of stars in 3 alien dialects. He taught her how to repair a cleaning drone with only wire, tape, and patience. One evening, as twilight curled along the spires, Kalia curled up beside him on a quiet balcony and asked, "Do you still miss her?" "Every day," Jonah said. She nodded like she understood more than a child should. "Do you think she would have liked me?" Jonah turned to her. "She would have loved you, fiercely." That night, she fell asleep against his side, and high above them the stars burned soft and slow. The Queen, too, had changed, though few would dare say so aloud. She began attending morning briefings barefoot, asked more questions than she answered. Some nights, she wandered the corridors alone, stopping to watch her daughter sleep. Other nights, she stood beneath the tribunal eye, watching as its new flame indexing system realigned its algorithms, rewritten to prioritize protection over perfection. One morning, she summoned Jonah not to a court, but to her private greenhouse. He arrived hesitant, mop still slung across his back, old habits dying slow. She offered him tea without comment. "She keeps a cloth in her pocket," Adrian said, pouring. "From the day you were pulled from the floor, she folds it before every lesson, says it helps her think." Jonah smiled. "That was mine. From my first week here. She said it still smells like soap." They stood in silence for a while, the flowers whispering in a breeze not entirely natural. "She doesn't need a guardian who teaches her to rule," Adrian said. "She needs one who reminds her why the ruling matters." "I can do that," Jonah replied. "I know." They didn't speak of titles after that, or oaths, or flames. Only memory, and how the stars, if you looked long enough, always circled back to where they began. That evening, Kalia traced a spiral on the palace floor with a bit of chalk, then set her toy mop across it like a bridge. When the light hit it just right, it glowed faint violet, not because of magic, because someone had once remembered her when no one else did, and the stars remembered that.